get us started with the recording. And I'll go ahead and get us started with today's webinar. Great. So again, welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining today's webinar. This is the grant solicitation webinar for OJJDP fiscal year 2021, Reducing Risk for Girls in the Juvenile Justice System. This is a webinar where we will review the grant solicitation offered by OJJDP for reducing risk for girls in the juvenile justice system. Please note that this webinar isn't on the content area of reducing risk for girls in the juvenile justice system. Instead, for those who will apply for the application that is coming out for the fiscal year 2021. Or it is out for the fiscal year 2021. So I just want our audience who's on to be mindful that that is what will be covered during today's webinar. So thank you. All right. So just to remind the audience that we are indeed recording today's webinar. Please note that the recording of today's webinar will indeed be offered on OJJDP's multimedia page. Here, you can view archived webinars around juvenile justice and child victimization related topics, child victimization prevention related topics, Any supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk at this email address to get any of those supporting materials. All right. If you're having any issues downloading any of the items that are being shared currently through this file transfer that I'm sharing, please contact the help desk and we can give you access to that. Again, it's a PDF of today's presentation that I'm sharing. If you'd like to have optimal audio, we suggest that you dial out through the WebEx phone line and get connected through there. Have the system dial your phone and you'll be fully integrated. Again, for those who are joined, please note that you are indeed on mute. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties during today's webinar, please contact me, the host, directly, and I'll help to troubleshoot any technical difficulties that you may be experiencing. All right. To send your question related to today's grant solicitation, you'll go to the chat window and you'll type your question there. Please submit your question during today's presentation. In the To field, please select All Panelists when you're submitting your question. So again, please be sure to select All Panelists when you are sending your question related to today's grant solicitation, and then you'll hit Enter. And I'll repeat that for everyone when we get closer to the Q&A. For those of you who are viewing in a group, we ask that you help us to take count. So please go to the chat window and send to all panelists the total number of additional people that are in the room with you today. If you're viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing in a group with multiple individuals, please type the total number of additional people in the room with you today. Send to all panelists. If you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. All right, well, I will now turn today's webinar on over to Carrie for today's presentation. And Carrie, I've made you a presenter. Take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, William. My name is Carrie Strug, and I'm a grants management specialist in the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And our mission or our vision at OJJDP is that we have a nation where our children are free from crime and violence, and if they come into contact with the juvenile justice system, that the contact should be both just and beneficial to them. And so our mission is to provide national leadership, coordination, and resources to prevent and respond to juvenile delinquency and victimization. We support the efforts of states, tribes, and communities to develop and implement effective and equitable juvenile justice systems. which enhance public safety, ensure youth are held appropriately accountable to both crime victims and communities, and also empower youth to live productive, law-abiding lives. And why you all are here today is for the OJJDP FY 2021, Reducing Risk for Girls in the Juvenile Justice System Solicitation. And the objective of this webinar is to provide a general overview of the solicitation, to highlight some key eligibility and solicitation requirements, as well as to identify tools and resources that will hopefully facilitate the application process. So this solicitation was released on December 28th, and this year there's a two-step application process. The first deadline on grants.gov is going to be February 12th at, before midnight Eastern Standard Time. And then the second deadline is the full application in JustGrants, which will be February 26th. All of the awards for this solicitation will be in the form of a grant, and the project period should be for 36 months. So who's eligible? We get this question a lot. As stated at the very beginning of the solicitation, this is the list of who's eligible. City or township governments, county governments, Native American tribal governments that are federally recognized, Native American tribal organizations, other than federally recognized tribal governments, nonprofits that have 501c3 status, private institutions of higher education, public and state-controlled institutions of higher education, and state governments. So a lot of people want to know, what exactly does girls involved in the juvenile justice system mean? So for purposes of this solicitation, it refers to girls who are younger than age 18, who've been arrested or referred for intake to a public agency legally responsible for handling juvenile crime, delinquency, and youth in need of guidance, treatment, or rehabilitation due to problematic behavior. Eligible applicants may continue to provide services to girls who remain in the juvenile justice system under a state's extended juvenile court jurisdiction. So again, at the time of the girls need to be under the age of 18, but obviously if they're in the program and they age up, pending, you can continue providing services. You need to look at your state's extended juvenile court jurisdiction. For the purposes of this solicitation, what does state mean? It means any state of the United States, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. So applications that are submitted by non-government organizations, they must have an established partnership via a memorandum of understanding or an analogous document with a public juvenile justice agency at the local or state level. Why? Because this will ensure close collaboration around referrals for those girls involved in the juvenile justice system and who are eligible for services provided by the proposed project. So again, a fully executed MOU or analogous document must be included as an attachment with a submitted application to be considered for funding. So the overview of the program, we want to enhance the capacity of applicant organizations to respond to the needs of girls involved in the juvenile justice system. Programs should provide prevention and early intervention strategies for girls who are involved in the juvenile justice system. And programs should be focused on girls that are in the juvenile justice system. What are the goals? They are to reduce risk factors and promote protective factors for girls who come in contact with the juvenile justice system and place them on a path towards success, stability, and long-term contribution to society. So what are the objectives for this particular solicitation? We want to increase protective factors to prevent further delinquent behavior by girls involved in the funded programs. And we want to improve juvenile justice system responses for girls who are in contact with the system. What are the deliverables? They are to develop and implement direct service programs for girls involved in the juvenile justice system to reduce reoffending. They should enhance or expand existing prevention and early intervention programs to meet the specific needs of girls involved in the juvenile justice system. And the program should develop, expand, or enhance targeted curricula for staff to ensure they have the skills necessary to implement these programs for girls in the juvenile justice system. OJJDP expects programs to be based upon best practices, and you may include a variety of services. As you can see some examples, in-home services, screening, assessment, education, counseling. So starting in FY 2020, there were some OJP priority considerations for applications, and they are continuing this year. There are 3 of them. Those that address specific challenges that the rural communities face, those applications that demonstrate that the individuals who are intended to benefit from the requested grant, that they reside in high poverty areas or persistent poverty counties, and then also applications that offer enhancements to public safety in economically distressed communities, or we refer to them as QOZs. So what are the award details? The maximum number of awards will be 7. There were a few different versions that were posted of this solicitation. If you reviewed the first one, it was only 5 awards, but they were able to find some additional funding, and so the last version of the solicitation that posted should state 7. And each award will be in the amount of $425,000. So the total amount of funding is, the $2,975,000. And the start date for when the project would begin would be October 1st, 2021. And again, the duration should be for 36 months, 3-year project. So what should an application include? What are the application elements? Here they are: the standard form, the SF-424, the standard application information, your proposal abstract, your proposal narrative, your budget worksheet and budget narrative. These are web-based forms this year. And then again, for non-government agencies, you need to submit an MOU or an analogous document with a public juvenile justice agency. If you have an indirect cost rate agreement, you need to submit that. A financial management and system of internal controls questionnaire, as well as disclosure of a process related to executive compensation. Now, you'll see some of these are bold, and that is because they need to be submitted for you to pass the BMR, the basic minimum requirements. So if an applicant does not submit the proposal abstract, the proposal narrative, the budget worksheet and budget narrative, and if you're a non-government agency, you don't submit the MOU, you will not move on to peer review. So now I'm going to go through each of those elements. The SF-424, this is a required standard form used as a cover sheet for submission of pre-applications, applications and related information. What is the standard application information? This section of JustGrants application is pre-populated with the SF-424 data submitted in grants.gov. The applicants will need to review the standard application information in JustGrants and make edits as needed. Within this section, applicants will need to add zip codes for areas affected by the project and confirm their authorized representative, as well as verify the organization's legal name and address. So what should be in the proposal abstract? It should be no more than 400 words, and it should summarize the proposed project and include the primary activities, products, and deliverables, the service area, and who specifically is going to benefit from the project. Again, this must be completed in JustGrants this year, and it's a web-based form. The proposal narrative, this will be submitted in JustGrants this year, and the document should be double-spaced. It should use a standard 12-point Times New Roman font, 1-inch margins. It should not exceed 30 pages, and it has to include these areas: the description of the issue, the project design and implementation, capabilities and competencies, and a plan for collecting the data required for this solicitation's performance measure. So what should be included in the description of the issue? You should describe the nature and scope of the problem that your program will address. You should use data to provide evidence that the problem exists and demonstrate the size and scope of the problem, and also document the effects of the problem on the target population and your community at large. You should include information about the source of the data and/or a citation with any data or research referenced in the narrative. And you should describe the target population and previous or current attempts to address the problem. So the project design and implementation, applicants should detail how the project will operate throughout the funding period. You should describe the strategies that you will use to achieve the goals and objectives. You should include details regarding any leveraged resources from local sources to support the project and discuss plans for sustainability beyond the grant period. You should also provide a realistic timeline that indicates major tasks associated with the goals and objectives of the project. So the timeline is obviously an attachment. All right, capabilities and competencies. You should describe the experience and capability of your organization and any contractors or subgrantees that will be used to implement and manage the effort of the project. You should highlight any previous experience implementing projects of similar design or magnitude, and also describe the roles and responsibilities of the staff and explain the program's organizational structure and operations. So as an attachment, you should also include a copy of an organizational chart. So the plan for collecting the data required for this solicitation's performance measures, you should describe the process for measuring project performance. You need to identify who will collect the data, who's responsible for performance measures, and how that information will be used to guide and evaluate the impact of your project. You should also describe the process that will be used to make sure that you accurately report the data to us. So if you want to look at more information regarding the performance measures, you can visit OJP's performance measurement page, and you can also go to OJP's grant application resource guide. I would highly recommend you all check that out because there's additional information on post-award reporting requirements and some information regarding performance measurement data. So you also need to submit a budget detail worksheet and a budget narrative. The budget narrative should thoroughly and clearly describe every line item, every category of expense listed in the budget detail worksheet. Your budget should be complete, cost-effective, and obviously allowable. Again, awards will be in the form of a grant for this solicitation for these awards, and there is no match requirement. So there's also additional components to your application, and they are listed here. They include a tribal authorizing resolution, if that's applicable to your organization's application, research and evaluation, independence and integrity, the documentation of rural challenges, the documentation of high poverty areas or persistent poverty counties, the documentation of enhanced public safety and QOZs. So those three were the OJP priority considerations. There's also the disclosure of lobbying activities, the DOJ certified standard assurance, applicant disclosure of duplication and cost items, the DOJ certifications regarding lobbying, debarment, suspension, and other responsibility matters, and drug-free workplace requirements, and then, if applicable, your disclosure and justification of your DOJ high-risk status as a grantee. So where and how do you apply? So this year is a two-step process. You will submit an SF-424 and an SF-LLL in grants.gov. And again, the deadline for this is earlier than the full application in JustGrants. Grants.gov deadline is February 12th, so right around the corner. And then you will submit the full application, including all your attachments, in JustGrants, and that deadline is February 26th. So if you want additional information on how to apply, you should go to the section OJP Grant Application Resource Guide, and there's further information. So how do we review the applications that come in? The review criteria, here it is. The description of the issue will be rated 15%. Project design and implementation is at 40%. One's capabilities and competencies is rated at 30%. Plan for collecting the data required for this solicitation's performance measures is 10%. And then the budget is at 5%. Again, budget narratives should demonstrate generally how you will maximize cost effectiveness of grant expenditures, and you should demonstrate your cost effectiveness in relation to potential alternatives and the goals of the project. So how do we, oh, I'm sorry about that. Go back. So the application review process, applications that meet the basic minimum requirements, the BMR, they will be evaluated for technical merit by a peer review panel in accordance with OJP peer review policies and procedures. We do have other important considerations for OJJDP, which include geographic diversity, the strategic priorities, which are the OJP priority considerations, such as rural communities, high poverty areas or persistent poverty counties, and then as well as the QOZ zones. We also consider the available funding, how an applicant's past performance might have been, the extent to which the budget worksheet and budget narrative accurately explain project costs. Also, pursuant to the Part 200 uniform requirements, before award decisions are made, we also review information related to the degree of risk that an applicant poses. Among other things, to help assess whether an applicant that has one or more prior federal awards has a satisfactory record with respect to performance, integrity, and business ethics. OJP checks whether the applicant is listed in SAM as excluded from receiving a federal award. Please take those into consideration when applying. And so if you have further questions after today's webinar, as indicated in the solicitation, you can send them to the response center at grants@ncjrs.gov, and or else you can call the 1-800 number, and they should get a response back to you relatively quickly.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Carrie, and we'll go ahead and get started with the Q&A here. The VDI is crashing on me, but no worries. I have a list of all of the questions that have come in here, thanks to my co-host, Alyssa. So we'll just go ahead and get started with questions while I do a little reboot on my end here. So one of the first questions we got coming in is regarding eligibility. And a person asks, do public school districts fit the, and they put in quotes here, state government organizations? Can school districts for K through 12 apply?
State government. That is a great question, and I want to confirm before I provide a response. Clearly we list, private institutions of higher education. So I would like a little bit more information, K through 12, in terms of how are you working with girls in the juvenile justice system. So if you could please provide more details and submit your question to the response center, I think we can give you a better response. And William, okay. I had a few questions that came in prior, to this webinar when you could submit some questions.
Yes, please.
And so there's some of those that I would just like to reference quickly, since those, put forth their questions in advance. They said, will geographical location be a priority? And I actually believe I put this in the PowerPoint presentation where we say, there's some other things that we do consider. And so, yes, that is something in terms of when we have additional review criteria. We say OJJDP, looks at geographic diversity, the OJP priority considerations, past performance, available funding, things like that. So geographical location is reviewed. A lot of people asked regarding, performance measures, and there is a link within the performance measurement section of the solicitation that I recommend you refer to. A question came in, does the relationship have to be with a juvenile justice facility? And the answer is yes, a related juvenile justice facility, which, we have the definition within the solicitation. And then they further that question with, does the relationship require a history, or can it just be established for this RFP? And as long as you have an MOU and that you do have that established relationship, you are eligible to apply. A question came in asking if this year's solicitation is different from FY 2020, and some minor changes were made. So they are similar in terms of the goals, objectives, and deliverables, but some things have been added and tweaked here and there. A question came in asking, is this for direct service, or is the focus to be on training? And if you look at the objectives and deliverables, we need you to focus on both. The direct service for the youth, but also make sure that there's training for all the personnel, for all the staff involved, so that they can assist with those direct services. There were some questions regarding the budget, and again, I highly recommend that you check out the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide and go to the budget section. They are going to be web-based forms this year, the budget detail worksheet and budget narrative, so hopefully that will assist many applicants with having a standard form. I also got a question regarding why there's 2 deadlines. And again, this is the first year that applications will be submitted through JustGrants. If you've applied in the past, you are familiar with grants.gov, so you will submit your SF424 and SFLLL in that first, and then you have an additional 2 weeks to get in all of your other application documents into JustGrants. Thanks, William. Those are the questions that I had, received earlier that I wanted to address, but I'm happy to continue answering those questions that have come in.
Okay, great. Thank you. And those questions there that you addressed also did, it looks like, address a lot of other the questions that we see coming here in to chat on our end. So thank you so much for doing that and addressing those. So the next question that we have, this is around the lines of, I guess, a little bit more clarification of definitions. This person mentioned that they're working with a juvenile court that serves 7 counties. Must all 7 counties qualify as, and this is in quotations, high poverty, or this is in quotations, persistent poverty counties in order to satisfy DOJ's poverty policy priority area?
So the OJP priority considerations, those you're going to submit what relates to your county or counties, and then we are going to review them. So I would familiarize yourself with the various links and what is required so that we have all the data and can, give you those priority points as needed.
Okay. Someone asked, can a county be both rural and poverty challenged status, or do we need to pick the top problem?
So you're going to want to look at those links and see if your census or, your zip code qualifies. So, you can be both. And it's up to the applicant to decide how and where they're providing these services.
Okay.
And even if you are, excuse me, but just because you are maybe a rural community or you do demonstrate that you're a high poverty area, persistent poverty county, you need to follow the instructions to make sure that you present the information so that you do get the credit for those priority areas. So please take a look at the OJT policy priority areas on, I believe in the latest version of the solicitation is page 8.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go a little bit, it looks like, into some of the requirements that folks wanted some clarification on. Is there a minimum number of girls to be served annually?
No, that's up to the applicant and their project design.
Okay. Let's see. Under this deliverables, the third deliverable is about developing, expanding, or enhancing targeted curricula for staff. Does it matter how many staff we train in order to be competitive?
Every applicant is going to have a different idea for their proposed project, and so I encourage all of you to really think about what is it going to take to ensure that those that are working with the girls in the system, are they have what they need to make the most of the program and to assist the girls. So only you in your community or with your project know that. And, obviously it's going to differ for different applicants.
Okay. What if the entity applying has had past performance with juvenile court before? Would this be applicable under peer review?
In terms of the capabilities and competencies, or can you provide a little bit more information?
That's a very good question. I'll ask the person who submitted that question if you could provide a little bit of additional detail in regard to your question there. And again, just as a reminder to folks, anything that we don't get to today, please note that you can submit your questions to the response center that has the information on the slide here. Yeah. Okay, so we'll come back. It looks like there's a question around the MOUs here, Carrie. Can an MOU be directly with a juvenile court?
I believe so. Again, so it would be a nonprofit that is working with the juvenile court. So the girl, I think I need a little bit more clarification on that as well in terms of the setup.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, to the audience member, I asked that if we have enough time, you can submit a little bit more clarification of that and we can circle back. In the meantime, Carrie, I wanted to go into some parts of questions that were more so around the technical aspects of things and with JustGrants. So I may have also Jen kind of chime in here as well if she sees fit. So a person asked to confirm, the whole application needs to be submitted through JustGrants. Applicants do not have the ability to submit the entire application through grants.gov. And then they put in parentheses here only the SF424 and SFLLL.
That's correct. Only the SF424 and the SFLLL will be submitted in grants.gov this year. The rest of the application should be submitted in JustGrants.
That's correct. And if I could add, I did add a link in the chat about the application submission process for JustGrants. So if you'd like additional training resources to kind of walk you step by step through that process, certainly look in the chat. I'll add it again for folks to access.
And along those lines, since we have you here, Jennifer, it looks like there were a couple more JustGrants questions that came on. JustGrants is an optional submission or a required submission, and there's a question mark after that. They then go on to say, please clarify if the two-part submission is mandatory. They wanted to understand if applicants can use either system or both systems, and this was asked a few times by a few folks on the line today.
Yes, it is a mandatory submission that's required for both. It's not optional, and the training link that I added online in the chat will walk you through the process. So yes, you do need to complete the first portion, which Carrie mentioned, for your first deadline, and then the rest of the application in JustGrants.
Great, thank you. Again, more questions about submission here. The due time of the proposal, is it Eastern time or Pacific time? I want to say Eastern, but I just wanted to make sure we clarify just the due date, the time on the due date, if it was Eastern or Pacific.
It is my understanding it is Eastern, but Jennifer, I'd love for you to.
Yeah, that's a great question. To my understanding, it is Eastern. What we can do is just circle back to make sure that it is Eastern, but I do believe it's based on Eastern time submissions.
Okay. All right. Let's see. In the narrative under project design and implementation, there's a requirement for a timeline. Can that timeline be an attachment, or does it have to be part of the 30-page narrative?
No, the timeline can be an attachment.
Okay. Again, more about the clarifications around some of the documents there. Concerning components of the application, do the table of contents and title page count as part of the 30 pages?
I have not seen title pages previously. I would recommend you do that in terms of, what is mandated. You need that proposal abstract, proposal, various, segments. So I would focus on that. All the attachments are not included in that 30-page limit. Those are separate.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, it looks like a question here about the award amount. They wanted to know, is it $450,000 annually, or is the $450,000 over the 3 years?
So it's for the total project period, so it's over the 3 years, but it's $425,000.
Okay. Thank you for that.
And yeah, you'll want to make sure you do not exceed the award amount. You just want to apply for the limit that is, the award amount that is provided in the solicitation.
Okay. So I want to circle back really quickly to one of the MOU questions that you addressed earlier. And so what they were saying, Carrie, is that when they asked can an MOU be directly with a juvenile court, they came back and just said, yes, a nonprofit working with a juvenile court.
Okay, well, as stated in the eligibility, we say, public agency that's legally responsible for handling juvenile crime, delinquency, and youth in need of guidance, treatment, or rehabilitation due to problematic behavior. So from that description, I believe they are eligible. I would like to kind of understand a little bit more of what the program is and what they plan on doing with it. But in terms of eligibility, I believe from, the description that's in the solicitation that they are eligible. So
okay.
They're in the juvenile justice system if they're going through the juvenile court process. So they may have already been in the system and they're coming out, or, they're waiting to go through the system. I'm not sure exactly where they are with the program, but it sounds, please look at the eligibility in terms of, again, legally responsible for handling juvenile crime, delinquency, and youth in need of guidance, treatment, or rehabilitation. So.
Great. Okay. And again, to the audience there, please continue to submit your questions. Remember, when you're sending in your questions, please send them to all panelists. Again, for those who may have come on a little bit late, just reminding you all that we want you to submit your questions. You can submit them to all panelists. We're going to try to get to as many as we can before we wrap up. But there's a couple more questions that we have here for you, Carrie. Someone asked, this is kind of more so into the miscellaneous parts of questions that have come in. Someone asked about the letters of support. They wanted to know who should the support letters be addressed to, and they asked, should they be addressed to you?
Normally, I would suggest it go to the administrator of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. It's currently an acting administrator, and that's Cheryl Jones. So that's what I would recommend at this time.
Okay. Someone asked, is there an interactive map that shows census tracts available anywhere?
In terms of, I'm sorry, can you clarify a census tract or a map of what? I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question, William? I apologize.
Well, that was it, but what I'll do is ask if the participant, if you can go ahead and add a little bit more clarification to that particular question that you asked, and we can circle back to it in regards to their question about interactive map in the census tract. But we do have a couple more questions here that I'll go through. And one, it looks like, was regarding the award amount. So with the award amount being for 36 months, does the amount spent have to be equal for each 12 months, or can it be top-heavy in the budget for the first year because of training and gathering that's needed to get started?
The budget is what the applicant needs to provide their project. And so if, this is what they believe is needed and they can rationalize it and it's cost, effective and it makes sense, then that's what they should do. It does not need to be the same amount every year. However, they need to make sure that every year they are providing details for each budget line item and explaining their rationale for the various costs.
Okay. Let's see. Someone wanted to ask about caps on indirect costs and whether those are included in the budget or can be added on top of the set budget.
So if your organization has a federally cognizant indirect cost rate agreement, you can submit that with your application and you can incur indirect costs. If not, you may take a look at and request that you utilize the de minimis rate. But the total award amount that an applicant will receive is the $425,000, and your indirect would be within that. And you could either, again, use your federally, your federal rate that you got from an agency. And if you do not have one of those, then you can request to utilize the de minimis rate, which is 10%.
Okay. We have still a couple more questions coming in as well to Carrie. It looks like some people are still submitting a few questions here. Before I go to the next question, Carrie, my WebEx is stalling a little bit on me, so I just want to see if you're fine with just moving the slides just a couple for me before I can take over, and want to make sure the slide has the response center slide up, just to make sure that that one is up, and it may be going back to where we had the response center information. I do want to make sure folks know where they can, send any questions that we don't get a chance to get to today. So thank you for doing that for me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Someone wanted to know about a budget template. They wanted to know, is there a budget template we can use? And if so, can we send out a link?
This year, again, is somewhat different because you're submitting in JustGrants, and it is a web-based form.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. Someone wanted some clarification around the SF424 being submitted 2 weeks prior to the final document. Since budget numbers are included within the 2-week period following the submission of the 424, there may be changes in amounts to budget categories. What provisions have been made to reconcile any discrepancies, and can the 424 be revised?
So this is, again, the first year that we have, a 2-step process. SF424s, I know, can be revised because there have been instances where maybe an applicant's funding amount is reduced or, increased, and then they need to make the necessary changes. But on the front end of an application, I apologize, but I don't understand why there's a problem with the 2 weeks on the FF424. I believe you would request you're not going to exceed the $425,000 that you are eligible for this particular solicitation. So I would, I believe that's all that, would be required of you to kind of figure out the total amount that you are requesting. And then, you'll match that up with your full application.
Okay. Let's see. A few more questions, it looks like, came in regards to circle back to the MOU as well. With regard to the MOU requirement, if there is an organization that is contracted by the state juvenile justice system to provide prevention and diversion services, would an MOU with such an organization be acceptable, or could we still need an MOU, or would we still, need an MOU with the state agency?
So it's a state agency that has a current contract with a particular organization. Am I understanding that correctly?
I believe so, because they said on here, if there's an organization that is contracted by the state juvenile system to provide prevention and diversion services, would the MOU with that organization be acceptable, or would they still need an MOU with a state agency? It sounds like if another MOU with an organization, another organization doing, again, juvenile justice system to provide prevention and diversion services suffice.
But it's the state agency that is applying, is the main applicant? Because the MOU is mandated for the non-government organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So that we know, that there's going to be close collaboration with referrals to the juvenile justice system, like facility or services.
Okay.
If they have further questions, please submit to the response center. But if you are already working with someone, you should have that ability to, we need verification that there is an established partnership. That's what we're concerned about for those non-government organizations that are going to provide services. But yeah, so please provide more details. I don't know if I'm interpreting things correctly.
Yeah. And for those, just a reminder, the response center information is indeed on the slide here where you can easily submit those questions there as well. Another person wanted to get an example of the entities that you would expect in the MOU. So can it be state attorney's offices? Could it be sheriff's departments? Could it be probation departments? It looks like they wanted maybe examples of those entities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of those are great examples. If it's, you know, a nonprofit organization that is, you know, working with this public agency, we need to know, like, what is that relationship, and describe, you know, when we talk about in your proposal narrative, whom is doing what, and provide those organizational charts so we understand, you know, what's going to be happening with the federal dollars and how you plan on benefiting these girls.
Okay. Of the 3 deliverables, the first 2 are very similar. Can you provide a more detailed explanation? And I just want to remind folks that these solicitations are definitely available to read through, and we also have the PowerPoint that when we get towards the end here, I'll reshare the PDF of this PowerPoint as well for folks. So it's up to you if you want to get into the details of that, Carrie, but I did want to remind people that the solicitation is available for them to revisit as well.
That's great. Thank you, William. You know, some of them, I think the language is similar in a sense, but it's also, you know, the first deliverable says develop and implement direct services, whereas the other is enhance and expand existing prevention and early intervention programs. So they are a little bit different. You know, again, I would encourage you to focus on the overall goal of the solicitation, which is to, you know, reduce the risk factors and promote protective factors for girls who come into contact with the juvenile justice system. We want them to be placed on a path towards success, stability, and to be, you know, good contributors to society in the future, moving forward. And so, you know, we try and align our objectives and deliverables to that. And, you know, again, each applicant has a different idea of and a different need, and we'd love for you to explain to us how you're going to reach these deliverables as best as you can. You know, and hopefully they're based on best practices. And again, they can include a variety of services.
Okay. Would there be an annual TA or grantee meeting that we would have to budget for?
At this time, there is not a training and technical assistance program. And since it was not mandated in the solicitation, you do not need to budget things at this time. I think in our current environment, a lot of things are happening virtually. So if, you know, a new grantee training or a certain webinar is presented, I don't believe it should add additional costs to participants. And again, because it was not in the solicitation, that is not something that you would be required to utilize your award funds for.
Okay. Jennifer, it looks like a person messaged me directly stating that they're in the process of certifying and submitting their application. However, when they hit the submit button, apparently it says something along the lines of they need to verify entity profile information. I know that you provided the contact information in the chat before, but did you want to speak to that at all, or do you maybe want to ask the person to do something specifically? They were mentioning that it says, I guess, please contact the individual designated to manage the org entity, and they're saying they are that person. That's who they are, and they've gone through IT but didn't get any, needed some further assistance.
Sure. We can certainly, our training and support team, new manage an email box. And what I'll do is I'll add our email information in the chat here, but it sounds like you'll want to just make sure your entity profile is correctly set up so that you can actually proceed in the system. So what I'll do is I'll add a link to the entity management, entity setup for JustGrants, and then I'll also provide our email address so that you can reach out to us directly and we can kind of get you squared away.
Great. And Jennifer, it looks like that link that you post will address a few people who it looks like here are asking for that in regards to some help with that for JustGrants. So thanks in advance for posting that to everyone and sending that to our audience too.
Certainly, certainly.
All right. And it looks like we're coming up on the end, and so let's see. How should CVs and references be included, and will they count towards the 30-page program narrative limit? Carrie, I think that may be addressed back to you regarding CVs and references.
Yeah, if you want to provide those attachments, you can add them as additional attachments. They are not required. You know, there is a section that you do need to address in the proposal narrative regarding capabilities and competencies, but that is not personnel, you know, specific the resumes and whatnot. And if you do want to provide those, you can do that as additional attachments.
Okay. Would areas that are surviving or have been impacted by natural disasters be considered a specific challenge for priority? It looks like this is a specific question maybe for this particular individual, but it looks like they wanted to know about their location because it got hit with back-to-back hurricanes, and so they wanted to know, would it be considered a specific challenge for priority?
You know, I'm very sorry to hear about your challenges. At this time, the OJP priority areas are those that are listed in the solicitation. Again, as was referenced in the presentation, as well as one of the first questions that had come in prior to the webinar that I wanted to address, is we do, you know, look at additional criteria. We do look at a lot of different things when reviewing the applications. So there are other important considerations. Again, that includes the geographic diversity, you know, the OJP priority considerations, funding, past performance, things like that. And so, you know, I encourage you to apply and let us know where your target, you know, what your target population is and the needs there and all those things that were reviewed in the webinar presentation in terms of addressing those in your proposal narrative and responding to, you know, the various components of the solicitation, and then we'll review the application and then kind of look at all the other things as well.
great. Looks like questions are slowing up here or have already been addressed. And again, Jennifer, thank you for posting that information there for those, because some of the questions even afterwards, it looks like these items that you're posting here are addressing those individuals. So that being said, Carrie, it looks like since the questions are slowing down, I wanted to maybe give you, oh, wait, okay, looks like we have one last question. Carrie, there was a question that came in the last minute here. They wanted to know about in-kind donations. Could you address where to include in-kind donations?
Mm-hmm. So you'll want to put that into your proposal narrative. You're going to talk about your design and implementation, and that's where you would include details regarding, leverage resources from local sources to support the project, and it's also where you could, discuss your sustainability plan for the project. So I would put it in that section, the project design and implementation, which is within the proposal narrative.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. All right, so it looks like we are wrapping up with the questions. And again, if we didn't get a chance to get to your question, or if you do have questions that come in after today's webinar, please be sure to submit those to the Response Center, and we can get back to you there. That being said, we can go ahead and wrap up, and I wanted to turn it back over to you, Carrie, if you had any last-minute items that you wanted to go over before we wrap up. If not, I can close this out.
No, I just want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to listen to this webinar, and I wish you all the best moving forward and with your application process.
Okay, great. And my WebEx is acting a little funky. My chat has disappeared and all that, but I can still maybe move the slides here. I'm going to try to move them along here and see where we get to. Carrie or Jen, can I confirm on you all's end that you all can see me moving the slides here? Okay.
Yeah, we can see you moving the slides, and
Thank you.
It's on the NTEC contact information slide now. That's what's showing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my WebEx does not want to let me be great today, so no worries. We're wrapping up here, and I'm going to go ahead and do one last thing for the audience members, and that's share a PDF of the today's presentation that you saw. So for those who are on, you should see a box that will appear on your screen, and on that box you'll see in there a file that you can download. Again, that file is indeed the PDF for today's webinar, web event, so you can download that and just have that for your records. To get in contact with OJJDP's NTAC, you may do so through the contact information on this slide. Please be sure to check us out on Facebook, and be sure to sign up for any of the listserv where you can find out more about the events that we offer here at NTAC. If you'd like to get in contact with the help desk, learn more about JustGrants or upcoming events, please pay attention to this slide. We have the contact information for the TTA Help Desk. We have the website where you can go to OJJDP's website to learn more about the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. We also have where you can sign up for the listserv, where you can learn more about upcoming events that OJJDP has to offer. If you have a training or technical assistance need, well, please be sure to submit a request via OJJDP's TTA 360 platform. You can reach the platform through the URL on this slide. You can also view past webinar events. They're archived on OJJDP's multimedia page. You can go there to view webinars on juvenile justice and child victimization prevention related topics. If you'd like to get any supporting materials, you can contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk to get access to those materials. Please note that we do have a couple of events coming up. That includes another solicitation webinar that's set for next week. It's pertaining to multi-state mentoring programs. We also have a webinar with our colleagues with NDAA, the National District Attorneys Association, coming up next week as well, that you can register for each of those webinars. We also have another solicitation webinar that same week, as well as another webinar with our colleagues at NDAA on social media coming up the following week. And then the following week, we also have webinars with our colleagues with street law, in addition to another solicitation webinar that you can register for. And then finally, a webinar here with NDAA that you can feel free to sign up for. So that being said, the final thing I'm going to do is go ahead and share a poll question for you all to complete. And basically, on this poll question, we just simply want to know, how do you plan to apply the information that you learned during today's webinar? Please note that this particular poll question is multiple select, so you can go in and you can actually select multiple options here. So please take a moment to complete this and fill it out. And I'm going to go ahead and, yes, I'll resend this file for folks just in case. I see a couple of messages coming up, but my chat has disappeared, which is interesting. So I'm resharing this to people here so that you can get access to this this file and the PDF of this. So that being said, I wanted to thank everyone again for coming out today and hopping on today's web event. And take care and have a wonderful afternoon. Let me stop the recording here. And Carrie and Jennifer and Alyssa,